Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. I am Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching Easynomics. Former RBI Governor Duvvuri Subbarao has authored a new book, one that he describes as a collection of notes from his life and career in the civil service, the Indian Administrative Service, which he topped in 1972. The title of the book, Just a Mercenary, raises a question, and so do other details in the book. And joining me now on the show is Dr. Subbarao himself. Very warm welcome to you, Dr. Subbarao. It's good to have you with us today.
Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you for having me.
Let me begin by asking you for that question that you must have been asked by everyone who's reviewed the book. Why this book now, and what really prompted this unusual title?
Well, you all know, all financial journalists in the financial sector, you all know that I wrote my previous book, Who Moved My Interest Rate, about my RBI stint, tenure, 3 years after I left the RBI. I left the RBI in 2013, that book came out in 2016. And that book, to my surprise, found a big audience. Lots of people who read that book, youngsters especially, asked me, why didn't you write a book about your entire IAS career? I pushed back against that suggestion because writing a book about my IAS career sounded very daunting, because I'd kept no notes and I had to go back and jog through 50 years of memory. And there was a risk that I will embellish my positives and diminish my negatives. And also, I was in the IAS, I served in a different era, different context. I was not sure that my story would be relevant. But during the COVID lull, my wife encouraged me to write, so I started writing some notes to myself, not really intending to write a book. But then she encouraged me to bite the bullet, and over the last 2 years, I've written this book. Actually, I've struggled to write this book much more than I did writing earlier book. But now it's come out. It focuses largely on my IAS career, but there's also a couple of chapters about my RBI tenure. The second question is about why the title. As you people know, I agonized over lots of decisions. I agonized over the title of this book as well. Several alternatives were there, but ultimately I settled on this because, we're all prone to complaining about our country, about how it is unfair, unequal, there is no merit, etc. But when I look back on my life without any bias, I see that this country has given me so much. I went to a Sanic school with a government scholarship. I went to an IIT with a scholarship. I got to serve in the IAS. I became the governor of the Reserve Bank. All this, presumably because I had some merit. So there is some place for meritocracy in the country. And the question that constantly runs in my mind is, I've got so much from society, have I given back enough? I've always tried to do my best. But the question is, have I tried to do my best because I'm getting paid? Was I just a mercenary, or was I driven up by a larger calling? That's the rationale for this title with a question mark.
Well, you made that important point, and this is pretty much the last page of your book where, Dr. Subbarao and viewers, this is quite interesting because Dr. Subbarao, in the last chapter, a letter to his mother, states that I rose to become governor of the RBI. This was possible because what's and all, there are still opportunities for merit in our country. And on that note, I want you to give us an assessment of the opportunity that India presents for its citizens and young people today with almost 4 decades of reforms. Where do you think our country and our economy stand, Dr. Subbarao?
Well, that's a very broad question. I'm not sure I can answer that in the space of 2 or 3 minutes. But let us look at it from the point of view of a youngster today. Compared to my life 50 years ago when I was joining a career, youngsters today have lots more choices, lots more opportunities, of course, lots more competition. But our country has grown, has diversified, we're globalized. There are opportunities for young people. Of course, not everybody. There is a hierarchy. People fall into different levels of intelligence, competence, etc. But I believe there are opportunities for everyone. But there is, of course, unemployment. Unemployment is possibly one of our biggest problems. So the government has to create opportunities, and young people have to use those opportunities. There's got to be improvement in education, in health, in skills. And I think young people should be getting into careers, trying to do their best, and also not fearing failure. One of the lessons I learned in my life is that the secret to success is not never having to fail, but having failed to learn from that failure and move on. So that's what young people should be looking for. Sorry, I've drifted from one question to another, one answer to another, but that's the way I look at the country today, from the eyes of a youngster.
Since you spoke about jobs, and this perhaps is one of the most pressing issues, we are in election time right now, and whenever I have managed to go out on the field, this is an issue that keeps coming up. But in the last 30 odd years, especially post reforms, we have seen job creation, including primarily in the private sector, that has come under this head of services-led growth, including the IT sector. And over the past few years, there's been an effort by the government on trying to get manufacturing into India, which had perhaps in some ways taken a back seat. Do you think that is the answer to the creation of jobs, and will that help solve the issue of unemployment in India?
You mean services-led growth, jobs in the services sector?
The manufacturing sector, Dr. Subbarao.
Or the manufacturing sector?
Yes.
Yeah, certainly. I tend to agree with you. First of all, I agree with you that unemployment or joblessness is one of the biggest, if not the biggest problem in the economy today. You know, the economy is growing at a sizzling pace, 8.6% the year before last, 7.6% last year, 7% this year, and perhaps 6.5% plus over the next 2 to 3 years. But there's still unemployment. That's puzzling. This jobless growth is possibly because growth is coming from sectors like IT and finance, which are not job intensive. So what is the size of the problem? The unemployment numbers are quite unreliable. Whatever number we say, people dispute that. Unemployment is 7%, 8%, how many jobs we have to create. We might dispute the numbers, but we can't deny the problem. There is a big unemployment problem in the country today. And solving the unemployment problem is not just because it is politically right or morally right. It's an economic issue. Because unless we create jobs, especially for the bottom segment of the population, unless their incomes go up and unless they consume, we cannot sustain our growth rate. So creating jobs for the lower segment of the population is one of the most urgent imperatives in the economy today. We talk about demographic dividend, that's become quite fashionable. We can talk about it later in the interview if you want to. But the short point I want to mention here is that we can exploit the demographic dividend only if we can create jobs. So we have to create jobs. Where are jobs going to come from? Jobs are not going to come from the agriculture sector. If in fact agriculture productivity improves as we want it to, the agriculture sector will throw out maybe about 50 million people. If female labor force participation rate improves as we want it to, maybe another 25 million women will join the labor force. So we have to create as much as maybe 75, 80, 90 million jobs. The agriculture sector is not the solution. The services sector, you mentioned about that. When people look at India at a superficial level, they look at Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune, and Noida and think of the services sector. Yes, we are leaders in the services export are booming. But the point is that the jobs created by the services sector are about only 5 to 7 million. That's very minuscule in a working age population of 1 billion people. So we have to go back and fall back on manufacturing. And I'm not as much a manufacturing pessimist as many people are. I believe there is opportunities for creating jobs in manufacturing. Just look at this. We import about 100 billion worth of goods every year from China. Even if we can manufacture within the country as much as half of that, 50 billion, that'll create so many jobs. As Professor Arvind Panagaria, the chairman of the Finance Commission, as he says in his book, even in a difficult world where global trade is not booming, in fact is quite subdued, it should be possible for a country like India to increase its share in global trade because our share is so low. So our share in the global trade is now 4 to 5%. Even if we increase it from 5 to 7%, that'll help the job creation to a large extent. So I believe that there is a case for focusing on manufacturing for jobs.
Dr. Subbarao, the focus on manufacturing, do you principally feel that the PLI-led approach or even using tariffs in certain instances is the right way to go about it? Because incidentally, another RBI Governor, Raghuram Rajan, has come out swinging against the emphasis on manufacturing.
Yeah, I read Raghuram Rajan's book, as you must have too. And first, let's start with what Rajan and Lamba said. This is this, that manufacturing is a long value chain. The actual manufacturing is quite low value added. Much of the value added in manufacturing comes from the front end, which is research and design, innovation, and in the back end, which is marketing, financing, and branding. The government pouring huge resources to subsidize low value added manufacturing, according to them, is a waste of money. If the argument is that this is just the entry point for the entire vertical chain to come into the country, they're not sanguine about that, because they say that the global value chain as a mode of production is losing its comparative advantage. In any case, for India to attract global value chains is difficult because of a high tariff regime. On the other hand, services of the future, around the world, especially in rich countries, populations are aging. As populations age, they consume less of manufactures, more of services. So we must be focusing on services. India has a first mover advantage. We have a comparative advantage. And with digital technologies, it is now possible to offer services from a distance. Therefore, we must focus on services. That's their argument. But as we discussed earlier, I don't think focus on manufacturing and focus on services is mutually exclusive. Your core question is whether we should be spending huge amounts of subsidy on this low-end segment of manufacturing. I think that's an open question. The government argues that there's still hope that the value chain will come in. We've got to give it a fair chance and wait for a couple of years to know what the results will be. I am very or disinclined to jump to a judgment on this right now.
Fair point. Dr. Subbarao, you mentioned Arvind Panagaria, and I want to take a point that he's been making in the recent past and ask you that can India really be the number one economy, and this is a debate that resonates elsewhere also, in the absence of many important natural resources that we lack? We are not blessed by nature. For example, crude oil as just one instance. There is poverty, and although it's come down, it still remains a significant challenge. We are seeing climate change impact all of us in ways that we had perhaps never imagined, and our population is still going to be an issue. So in the conceivable future, do you see India being able to reclaim, as Dr. Panagaria has put it, a spot that it enjoyed a few centuries ago?
First of all, I think these comparisons between India a few centuries ago, and today, and claiming that we have some inherent right to get back to the number one position, I think is misleading. Because in the 1700s, when India and China accounted for more than 50% of GDP, much of GDP came from muscle power, from people. And India and China had large populations, therefore we accounted for much of GDP. But then the Industrial Revolution came and machines replaced muscle power. So today, GDP is determined by machines, not so much by human beings. Having said that, if you say whether we rise to the top spot in the economic league of tables, you've got to be more specific. Are you talking about absolute GDP? Are you talking about per capita GDP, which is a measure of the wealth or the richness of a country? In absolute numbers, of course, we will jump. We are the fifth largest today, and most economists have agreed that we're going to get there, including Mr. Chidambaram, who spoke recently. We'll get there, maybe to the number three position in the next couple of years. But the question is, we're still a poor country. A per capita income of $2,900. With that per capita income, we're about 1/30th or so in the global league in terms of per capita income. So the important thing is that we must improve our GDP and ensure that GDP is widely distributed, and that's where we must be focusing on. And if you're talking about natural resources, I want to respond to that, but just some straight thoughts. Economists have been trying to identify what makes an economy grow, and over the last 75 years, several theories. One of the theories is that you have to have natural resources, but Japan debunked that theory. Japan has risen to the number two position at some point of time. It's number 4 today. But Japan has debunked the theory that you need natural resources. And in any case, there are some studies to show that economic growth is becoming less energy intensive. So I think natural resources are going to be important, but are going to be less important for GDP than they were before. I made several points, which is that we will become a large economy. But the important thing is to become a rich economy, which takes much more than being a large economy. And as much as natural resources are important, I don't think they're as important as they used to be before.
Dr. Subbarao, we touched upon this and I want to follow that point up. We've benefited from globalization and the cross-border trade order that we saw starting from the 90s. But today we see a reversal of sorts. There's greater economic fragmentation. Trade is increasingly becoming bilateral or block-based, and economists and you yourself perhaps have commented on this, deglobalization. Is that a worry in your view for India and its growth hopes, and particularly achieving per capita income levels which we can justifiably be proud of?
Well, first of all, we've got to understand the extent of deglobalization that's possible. First, over the last 50 years, there has been globalization. Both rich countries and poor countries benefited as a consequence. And over the last 10 years, particularly after Trump and after Brexit and after COVID, there's been talk about deglobalization. How much of deglobalization really possible is another question. If you're talking about geopolitical conflicts and the world being divided into two segments, the US-China segments, as much as they talk about it, I'm not a geopolitical expert, but I don't believe that they will take it to the brink. And the world, including China and including the US, everybody stands to benefit from globalization of trade, globalization of labor, globalization of finance. So as much as countries talk about de-risking, decoupling, I think, is going to be difficult. Okay. So globalization will be there. And the second point is that India has benefited from globalization. We've also paid the cost for globalization. We benefited by way of increase in trade, increase in finance. Indeed, much of our growth is due to globalization, exports and imports, and capital that came into our economy. But We've also paid the penalty by way of the global financial crisis, by way of the taper tantrums when I was governor, and subsequently also because of several global developments that have had an impact on our economy, particularly the Ukraine conflict, the price of oil, the supply blockage from China because of extended lockdown. So we're a part of the global economy. We've got to manage to maximize the benefits and minimize the costs of globalization. And I think that geopolitical conflicts will be there, but I don't think they'll go to the extent of undoing the benefits of globalization totally.
Dr. Subbarao, you spoke about taper tantrums, and I will come to that, but quickly on the issue of growth and manufacturing, we've seen signs of the Chinese economy showing considerable fatigue. And there's a trend of many nations across the world wanting to cut their dependency on China, and therefore a lot of attention being focused towards India. Do you think we've done enough to capture this moment? In some ways, it could be a fresh Y2K sort of moment upon us, and that Y2K moment led to a certain kind of boom. Do you think we have done enough?
Well, I cannot answer that question credibly because I'm not clued into it. But let me say this much, that if you'd asked me this question 5 years ago, I would have been more circumspect. Because when this whole issue of China plus one came on the arena, the view was that whatever was going out of China was increasingly going to countries like Taiwan, Thailand, Malaysia, and the Philippines, and India was losing out. But over the last 3 years, the sense I get as a total outsider is that we're going to came together, that world investors who are not pulling out of China, but looking for a China plus one option, are looking at India because India offers some unique advantages that smaller economies like Taiwan or Thailand cannot offer, which is that we are a large economy, a consumption base of our bottom segment of consumption base of about 500 million people. That's a huge advantage, huge attraction for foreign investors. We've got skills. They're not world class. They're not the best practice. We've got to improve, but we've got I think a respectable skill endowment even as it is today. There is still a lot we've got to do in terms of improving the investment climate, making it a happier experience for investors. But I think we've gone much farther along than I expected 3 years ago. But still, we can't declare victory.
That's a good point that you make. I want to ask you, in terms of your long stint in government, both at the state level and central level, and there are multiple questions that I have, but one quick contemporary question before I go back to the previous thought, and this is the entire role that you feel that the government has now in the public sector space. The government of India has taken a major decision like Air India some time back, but should the government now, in the current circumstances, Dr. Subbarao, look towards disinvesting and deregulating much more and letting the private sector be the prime driver, continue to be the prime driver of growth in India?
I think so, most certainly. You're talking about the financial sector or the economy in general?
Oh, both, sir.
Yeah, most certainly. In fact, one of the fundamental tenets of the reforms that were launched in 1991 was to de-emphasize the public sector, because the pre-1991 India was the absolute faith in public sector, and the private sector cannot measure up to the challenge of growing the economy. But that's changed. So over the last 30 years in the reforms, we have moved along quite a bit. And I think the private sector should take the lead across the economy in manufacturing, in services, in the financial sector as well. There is absolutely no doubt about it. But the government must remain in sectors where its existence is necessary and important, and vacate the space for the private sector.
Should telecom be one where the government should continue in?
I think the government should allow the private sector to come in, even in the telecom, except for where strategic national interest or defense interests are involved.
Okay. Dr. Subbarao, you were joint secretary in the finance ministry during the 1991 reforms, and uh, uh, look back on that for our viewers, because a lot of people may not know. The younger generation that's been born after that has no idea of what transpired. So try and recall those days for our viewers, sir.
Well, that's again another very wide canvas question, but let me capture my response in about 2 to 3 minutes. As you said, most people who are 40 years or younger do not know, probably you're one of them, do not know what pre-reform India was like. We used to have a choice, if you went to a grocery store, a choice of 3 brands of soap and 2 brands of shampoo. If you went abroad, all we got was $20. And people were smuggling in low-end cameras and tape recorders. If you wanted to buy a scooter or a car, you had to book for it and wait for years. And if you wanted an LPG cylinder or a telephone connection, you had to book for it and wait for years. So it was a very, very different India, 1990, before 1991. That changed first with some speed and gradually afterwards. Today in 2024, India today is a lot different from the India in 1990. I was, like you said, joint secretary in the Ministry of Finance at that time when the reforms were actually carried out. I must admit that I was not part of the core reform team, but I was handling balance of payments for about 2 to 3 years before the 1991 reforms. So I saw on my watch the foreign exchange reserves dwindling, scraping the bottom of the barrel. We used to borrow in Tokyo in the evening and repay in New York, and borrow in New York in the morning and repay in Tokyo. We were playing the clock literally. The Chandrasekhar government was in office and they initiated a dialogue with the IMF for assistance, but the IMF was unwilling to commit assistance until there was a regular government in place. So my role, at that time we needed some bridge finance. I was in charge of handling economic assistance from Japan, so I had the responsibility of negotiating a bridge loan from Japan to tide us over until the IMF assistance came after the regular government came into office. That was one of the things I did during the reforms. And of course, I also signed away our gold because I was also in charge of the government mints at that time. Gold was under my control. I had the dubious distinction of signing away the pledge of gold in order to raise a temporary loan.
Giving away gold for a gold-obsessed country, Dr. Subbarao, did that get you today's equivalent of digital hate mail, or did you get trolled for that? If it was done today, and God forbid us, India will never get back into such a situation, but did you ever get trolled or stay up in the night as to what you have done?
No. All that was done in the name of the government. So as civil servants, we were anonymous. So it was the political leaders who got the credit or the blame for whatever was happening. One of the things we were told was that civil servants are to be backroom boys and girls.
You become a civil servant, and many of our viewers will have children who are perhaps aspiring for that. I want to ask you this. Looking back, was joining the IAS a good use of an IIT education?
I should think so. I should think so because what the IAS needs is a college degree in any subject. Because what it needs is not domain knowledge, but sharpness of mind and breadth of mind and depth of thinking in order to apply whatever you learn through your education to real life situations. So to believe that an IIT education is a waste of talent and to get into the IAS, I think is wrong. In fact, I'm glad you raised that question because 2 IIT directors last year had a difference of opinion on this issue. One IIT director said that we invest so much in educating our students to get them a BTech degree. If they go into non-engineering careers, that's a waste of education. But another IIT director countered him saying that what we're giving students is a broad-based IIT education. We're preparing them for the world. It's incidental that we're giving them specific education in technology, and I agree with that.
Dr. Subbarao, you've also written about it, and that is referenced in the book, and that brings me to the next question. Do you think beyond district administration and perhaps in the first 7, 8, 10 years of a civil servant's career, at levels above, in today's economy, today's societal issues, municipal issues, the IAS in some ways fails the needs of the time in terms of being specialized and effective in terms of policy making?
Well, first of all, let me say that I still believe and believe strongly that a country in our present stage of development, as large as ours, as diverse as ours, certainly needs a generalist civil service like the IAS. But the IAS needs to be restructured, in fact, needs to reinvent itself. I'm not saying that there's no space for specialists. We need specialists, we need generalists. To believe that the solution is to replace the IAS specialists is wrong. To believe that the IAS can perform every job is also wrong. We need a blend of specialists and generalists. In fact, I've never worked on this. Several committees, commissions have gone into reform of the IAS. But I think we must have a large-scale institutionalized mid-career level entry into the IAS. Let's not call it lateral entry, because that's become very pejorative. But IAS at two levels. You join when you're 23, 24, and there's another entry into the IAS when you're 35, 40. And those people are recruited at 35, 40, continue in the IAS. They don't get out of the government. So I think there is need for the IAS to absorb a lot more of country experience, of life experience, and that we should be working on. But let me reiterate once again that there is still a strong case for a journalist service.
Good point there. Dr. Subbarao, would you be, having been a specialist, or the Varuni, Vahini and alcohol business that you had to set up, would it have happened better or faster if, instead of you as an IAS officer, if a specialist from the liquor industry had been brought in?
I'm not so sure, because they asked me a question about myself. It's a bit inconvenient for me to answer, but that job was so challenging that a specialist or a journalist would have been equally challenged. I'm not sure many of your viewers understand, but let me say for their understanding that back in the mid-1980s, our Chief Minister, N.T. Ramarao, who was a staunch prohibitionist, he wanted to impose prohibition, but the civil servants pushed back, saying that if you impose prohibition, we lose revenue and we can't afford that to implement all your schemes. So he said, if I cannot implement prohibition, at least I will ensure that people drink clean liquor, because poor people are dying because they're drinking adulterated liquor. So his solution was that we must set up bottling plants for liquor in all the 23 districts of the state, and I was appointed as the officer on special duty for bottling liquor. So that's the context, and I believe that it would have been equally challenging for anyone.
I think you were perhaps the only OSD for bottled liquor, but does alcohol prohibition work and make sense? Because Mr. N.T. Ramarao took that decision in 1994 in undivided Andhra Pradesh, and we now have a more recent example of Bihar, and of course Gujarat being the oldest in this regard. Does this kind of prohibition work?
Well, work in what sense? Does it work in the sense of weaning people away from drinking?
The economic impact, the revenue impact, the health impact, the societal impact.
I don't think I'm competent to comment on all the dimensions of the question that you asked. But from a purely financial point of view, where I've had some experience, it's difficult for most state governments today to sacrifice excise revenue if they want to implement all their other programs. Gujarat, you cited, in fact, NTR used to ask us the same question when we said we can't do prohibition. Used to say, look at Gujarat. Gujarat has done it. But Gujarat has been a special case. They have, over a long time, they've been able to adjust to not having excise revenue. It's difficult in today's circumstances for a state to give up excise revenue. Of course, there are health dimensions, there are poverty issues. Those things have to be taken into account, certainly.
Absolutely. Even those chief ministers who are teetotalers cannot run successful governments without alcohol revenue. Dr. Subbarao, I didn't know this. Mr. Ramarao used to begin work at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. and you used to take an auto from Abbots to Panjaguta. Really? Because, you know, I have studied at Osmania University and I am familiar with this area. 4 a.m., 5 a.m. Unbelievable, sir.
That's right. That was NTR's work habit. He used to start work at, maybe not at 4, but 4:30 certainly. But he also used to retire at 4 p.m. And it's possible for a chief minister to say that, look, I've finished work for today, I'm going, and nobody would disturb him. But for the civil service, especially for people who were working in his personal office, it was very difficult because they had to start work from 4:30 in the morning and continue to work till 8 or 9 p.m. much after NTR had retired for the day. So it was a difficult time, but that's the resilience of the civil service, that they adjust to the political executive. And that's one of the traits of committed civil service, I would say.
Apart from Mr. N.T. Ramarao, any other maybe finance ministers that you have worked with who, or any other senior ministers who perhaps followed a similar daily schedule?
You know, I'm not familiar with the daily schedule of all the finance ministers, chief ministers that I've worked with. NTR I know because he used to call us for meetings. But I know Chandrababu Naidu, who was our chief minister, he was, he had personal discipline in the sense of he could put in long hours and regularly without taking any break. And that was possible because he maintained a lot of discipline about his personal lifestyle.
Since we are on the subject of NTR, we could perhaps call him India's foremost populist, and who perhaps could also led to the mainstreaming of freebies. Dr. Subbarao, in today's context, do you think freebies, populism is the greatest threat to both our central as well as, more importantly, state fiscal health?
I wouldn't go so far as to say that it is the greatest threat, but I do want to say that we need to have a serious debate on how much of freebies we can afford to give. First of all, let me say that in a poor society where millions struggle for daily livelihood, it is imperative for the government to provide safety nets to the most vulnerable. But you cannot extend that as if there is no restraint, because whatever we call freebies is a pejorative term, but freebies have an opportunity cost. The money spent on them could be spent on education, health, or on rural infrastructure, which would provide sustainable growth over a long term. As Chairman Mao said, you give a man a fish, he lives for a day. You teach a man to fish, he lives for a lifetime. So we must focus on providing people livelihood rather than giving them handouts. So I believe there's a strong case for limiting freebies, and this is a quintessentially political issue, and the leadership has to be taken by the central government. So I'm hoping that after the election, whichever government comes into office at the center, they will issue a white paper and generate a debate on how much a freebie is given, because people need to be educated about the opportunity cost of freebies and how it's eating into government revenues and what they're losing out as a consequence. So I think there's a strong case for reaching a consensus on this issue.
That's a very good point that you make, and hopefully that will get taken note of. You also say that no IAS officer gets trained to be honest, and just a little while ago you spoke about the resilience of civil servants, and I want to link it to the broader point that we saw a decade ago or so after the 2G so-called scam, and a lot of officers, in some of them getting targeted fairly, unfairly. We leave that to the courts. But what do you really mean by that? No IAS officer gets trained to be honest.
Yeah, I think so, because there is character and personality. Every individual has a character and personality, and all education is about personality development. Actually, when our parents teach us at home, when teachers teach us in school, when as IAS officers we get trained, it's all on personality development. They're not much on character. And it is character. A good IAS officer, indeed a good leader, must combine personality and character. And nobody in the IAS Academy, they teach you to conduct meetings, they teach you to listen to people, they teach you to be empathetic, they teach you to put your ear to the ground, but nobody teaches you how to be honest. So that is a personal value, and it is expected that not just IAS officers, everybody, all civil servants, indeed even people in the private sector, are expected to be honest, and that's a value we should carry. Nobody gives you training on that.
Dr. Subbarao, Vinod Rai, your batchmate, gave this nation in some ways as the CAG, because he bore the ultimate responsibility as the head of the institution, the presumptive loss theory, and this was 2G spectrum. You yourself have dealt with it in your official capacity. As we look back at it, do you think this was one episode that perhaps was one of the worst ones when it comes to the intricacies of economic policy, government decision making, and government servants and ministers weighing decisions in a long-term manner? Do you think this set us back and led to the policy paralysis crisis that we faced for several years?
I wouldn't put it like that. Let's talk about the 2G scam itself, what has come to be called a 2G scam. I think two issues get conflated. One is the whole process of licensing, how the applications were called, the time given for licenses, how they were selected, how they were asked to pay up the money. That was one thing. The other was the price at which 2G spectrum was given. People, not just people, but the media, the politicians, the parliament committees, and to some extent even the judiciary conflated both of them. They're two separate issues. I was not involved in the process of giving away licenses. That was done in the Department of Telecom, and that became the subject matter of a criminal prosecution of Minister Raja and some civil servants. The issue that I was involved as Finance Secretary was on the issue of price at which 2G spectrum must be given away in 2007-8. And I took the view that it is inappropriate to give spectrum away in 2007-8 at a price discovered in 2001, because in the intervening years, both in India and around the world, we realized that spectrum is a scarcer commodity than originally thought. And I thought part of the scarcity premium must accrue to the government. But the government, in its wisdom, decided that no, we will give it at the 2001 price, at least for this round, because we want to deepen telecom penetration. And I believe that is a legitimate view. That's legitimate for a democratically elected government to decide to give spectrum at below market price because they were pursuing some larger public good coming out of that. So to believe that if the government gave it away below market price, it had incurred a loss, I think is inappropriate. And that's the point I make in my book.
Absolutely. Dr. Subbarao, there is so much to discuss in this book, but As we wind down the conversation, which we have to, I want to pick up an issue which you have significant experience with, and this is in the context of the current debate about southern states getting a raw deal, given the way and manner in which our country is growing, North India, the distribution of resources. What is this debate really all about, sir? Is it more about politics and sentiment, or do you see that there is some point that is in favor of the arguments that are coming from the south, that the south of India is getting a raw deal?
Well, there is first a fiscal dimension to this and a political dimension. The fiscal dimension is this, that historically, there has been a practice of distributing part of the central pool of taxes across states. There is a finance commission appointed every 5 years, which decides what proportion of the central tax pool must be given to the states, and second, how that must be distributed across states. Now, if you take states, rich states like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, for every rupee they contribute to the central tax pool, they get back less than a rupee. On the other hand, poorer states like Bihar and Jharkhand, they get back more than a rupee when they contribute. For every rupee they contribute to the central tax pool, they get back more than a rupee. Such cross-subsidization is inevitable, indeed necessary, in a large and diverse country like ours. It happens in most federations. It happens perhaps more markedly in our country. And it's been an accepted principle, that cross-subsidization from richer states to poorer states. But the question today is that, are we hitting the limits of that cross-subsidization? Are southern states contributing? Are they anguished or cut up about how much they have to cross-subsidize? That's the fiscal dimension. The political dimension is this, that in 2 years from now, in 2026, we are up for a delimitation of parliament seats. Today, a South Indian has a bigger representation in the parliament than a North Indian, on a ballpark estimate. And if delimitation is done, that will be equalized, which means that South Indian states will lose parliament seats relative to North Indian states. What that means is that political power will shift partly from South India to North India. So what will happen then is a double whammy for the South, that even as they're losing political clout, they have to continue to subsidize the rest of the country. I hope that we can resolve this amicably, because this is one country. We need to be a strong country. We need the South to grow stronger. We need the North to catch up and, in fact, be equal to South. So some enlightened political leadership will be necessary, both at the central level and the state level, to resolve this issue.
If you were asked to propose a solution, what would you propose, sir?
You're putting me in the box. I'm not a politician, first of all. But I would say that there has to be, this delimitation cannot be done abruptly. It's got to be phased out. Okay. Second, there has to be some end dates put for cross-subsidization, how much cross-subsidization will happen. Okay, so that India is one country, and we want, prosperity to be evenly distributed. But I think this has to come about through some formula-based adjustments, both on the fiscal dimension and on the political dimension.
Very important points there, Dr. Subbarao. Dr. Subbarao, as I end this conversation with you, and you've been very generous with your time with us today, I don't think I read it in the book, but I have covered the finance ministry for many years as a reporter, and somewhere I once recall a comment from you, which I hope is correct, my memory, that your sons did not watch television, perhaps on account of that being a distraction, and that sort of helped them in their academic career. In this digital age, a lot of parents would want to hear from you as to how that could be made possible and whether this really helped your children in their academic lives.
No, my sons did not watch TV because for some time we could not afford a TV. We had a small house and we were not used to watching TV, and we did not get them into the TV habit. But once they got in, they were like the rest of the kids, and I think they're making up for all the lost time as much as they're mid-career professionals now. They are very much into digital age, and they're making up for whatever I denied them. But I think it's difficult, and I think it's also somewhat wrong to believe that an educated person, indeed even uneducated people, can wean themselves away or keep themselves away from digital technologies. The accent has to be on how to improve our productivity and how to improve our quality of life, even as we deploy digital technologies.
This is the book, viewers, and I would request everyone, both a student of economic policy administration or someone who is fascinated by the life arc and career of Dr. Subbarao, to read it. And as we go, Dr. Subbarao, I also read somewhere a joke about the Tehsildar and his dog. Would you be able to recall it for our viewers?
Yeah, this is I'm talking about field jobs where, public servants, especially IAS officers in field jobs, are very important. Everybody looks up to them. And they try to curry their favor. So there was a Tehsildar who had a pet dog, and people came to see the Tehsildar. And whenever they came, they got a lot of goodies for the dog because they wanted to curry the favor of the Tehsildar by petting the dog. And one day the dog died. So the entire town turned up for the dog's funeral. But a few years later, when the Tehsildar himself died, nobody turned up. So that's some sort of a fable, I would say, of the Tehsildar and his dog.
Well, that fable is perhaps quite true because given the steel frame that has held together India for decades and will continue to do so, and a service that you have served so well, and a nation that is very proud of your achievements, Dr. Subbarao. Thank you very much for sharing these notes and recollections from your administrative career for the readers and viewers who you have given time here today with us. I wish you all the very best and look forward to a few more books from you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Siddharth. Thanks very much for this interview. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, it's a wrap on this special conversation with Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao, former RBI Governor and civil servant of repute. We'll be back with more. Until then, goodbye.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.